Welcome, everyone. It's so wonderful to see everyone tonight. We're super excited that everyone's able to join us. Tonight is a series collaboration between the Laura C. Harris Series and the Beck Series. I am Claire Jen, Director of the Women and Gender Studies program, and on behalf of the Laura C. Harris Committee and Beck Series, we have the great pleasure of welcoming you tonight to an evening with Joy Harjo, women's empowerment, Indigenous poetry, and Native literature. Over the past 3 years, the Laura C. Harris Series, in collaborations across campus, including tonight's very special evening with Beck, have worked to deepen our knowledge and campus engagement with complex issues in indigeneity, Indigenous feminisms, and Indigenous-led approaches to solving pressing global and local problems. We hope, too, to inform our current series theme, transnational youth liberation movements, as a space to engage Denison students, along with the rest of the university community, in thinking about their involvement in the pressing issues of our times, and creatively imagining and building a just and viable future. We extend gratitude to the Laura C. Harris Committee, the Beck Series, faculty and students who have been part of today's class visits and tonight's event, Eisner Center staff, thank you so much, everyone back there, in front here too, and especially LCH Series Coordinator, Dr. Robin Brown. Thank you so much. Drs. Linda Krumholtz and David Baker will continue our introductions. Thank you.
Let us take time to recognize and respect Indigenous histories and presences connected to the land upon which we live. We acknowledge that the ground beneath our feet is historically the home of Indigenous peoples, many of whom have been forced to leave for other lands. We share now the names of the peoples who were the first to live, celebrate, lament, and sing upon the land where we now sit. People of the Fort Ancient, Hopewell, and Adena cultures, we don't know what they called themselves, so we use these names for them. Generations of Shawnee, Delaware, Wyandot, Miami, Ottawa, Kickapoo, Seneca, Cayuga, Anishinaabe, and the Potawatomi. We should also remember that Indigenous peoples are not only people of the past, but are here with us now. Ohio is the current home of people from many Indigenous nations, such as the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, Comanche Nation, Caddo Nation, Ute Indian Tribe, Cowlitz Indian Tribe, Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, Pokagon Band of the Potawatomi Indians, and Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. Acknowledgement of the land and its first peoples is a first step in a longer process of fleshing out meanings of our settler accountability, in addition to our responsibility in relations of ecological reciprocity. The Laura C. Harris program, Imagining Together Indigenous Activisms and Feminisms, was created as part of a commitment to learning how to work in solidarity toward the rights of Indigenous peoples worldwide. I want to thank OSU Newark and Kate Trigger Duffert for the language of this land acknowledgement. Thank you.
Poetry makes nothing happen. That's the 20th century English poet W.H. Auden from his famous poem In Memory of W.B. Yeats. Poetry makes nothing happen. Really? Really? This sentence, this clause, gets quoted all the time by people who don't like poetry, or who don't or won't understand it, or who, for whatever purpose, want to diffuse its power or doubt its beauty. In fact, Auden was not finished with his sentence. After his partial clause, poetry makes nothing happen, comes a colon, not a period. Nobody knows that. Then this essential passage, poetry makes nothing happen. It survives in the valley of its making, where executives would never want to tamper. Flows on south from ranches of isolation and the busy griefs, raw towns that we believe and die in. It survives, a way of happening, a mouth. That's better, right? To those executives, those ranches of isolation and busy griefs, what a phrase. Auden offers poetry's survival, and more than that, its necessary being, and our survival, as he speaks in the plural, the collective, about our belief. And poetry is, he says, a way of happening. It is a mouth. Against the nothingness, he offers creation and community and the organic presence of that speaking and singing mouth. I'm honored to speak these words to you tonight as we host, all of us, the poet Joy Harjo, and celebrate her great work and participate in her ongoing happening as she brings poetry out of the valley of poetry's making to our own little village and our college as we sit with our colleagues and friends and neighbors. It's hard to think of anything more hopeful than this. Joy Harjo first visited Denison, ready for this? In 1991, January 23, 1991. Where were you then? And then my friend Linda Krumholz and I were her hosts for her return visit in 2009. Tonight, I welcome her and I welcome all of you. I want to say our collective thank you to all the sponsors and all the hard workers for tonight's reading, the Laura C. Harris Fund, the Harriet Ewens Beck Fund for visiting writers. I want to thank the people from Women's Studies and Literature and Creative Writing programs of the English Department. And thank all the people tending to the lights and sound and furnaces and refreshments and our comfort. Joy Harjo knows, and in her essential work, she facilitates a vital conduit between the interior landscape and the vast landscape of the physical world, a conduit that travels as well from one person, one soul, one vision to another, and another, and another in a vast community made of vast numbers of people. We are connected, her poems say, over and over by ritual and accident, by heartbeat and instinct, by deep study, by vision, by inheritance. Her Muscogee and Cherokee inheritance is central to her vision of community and self and nature. As she says in her prayer-like preface to her memoir, Poet Warrior, "Come closer so I can feel your breath. You could be my daughter, my son, my grandchild or great-grandchild. You might be my sister, cousin, uncle, aunt. In the tradition of the old ones, all children are deemed as ours. We are all related. Or I'm speaking to you in the future when you are lost in the story and I have crossed the bridge of time into tomorrow." She's channeling the old ones, but she's also channeling Walt Whitman's Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. Writing in The New Yorker in a recent profile of Joy Harjo, Maya Phillips notices this confluence and makes a central distinction between Whitman and Harjo. Whitman has a certain influence, but he and Harjo diverge in their sense of scope. Whitman placed his vision of humanity within his vision of America. Harjo, though very much a poet of America, extracts from her personal and cultural touchstones a much more galactic understanding of the world, and her poems become richer for it. Here, she says, is a living, breathing earth to which we're all connected. We first read about that connection in 1975 when Joy's first book appeared, The Last Song. And it has started a lineage of books, of poetry, of social history, of personal memory and memoir, of works in drama, children's writing, and in anthology making. One site names more than 20 books, plus her edited anthologies, plus 7 or 8 solo albums. Yes, here's a poet who plays the alto sax and the flute. Sometimes she's a saxophone player who just happens to write stuff. Published by Yale University Press, her most recent book, Catching the Light, is a series of vignettes about why she writes. I'm hard-pressed to name another contemporary poet whose work and whose gifts have now been more celebrated and honored than Joy Harjo. From a 3-term stint as the American Poet Laureate to the 2022 Academy of American Poets Leadership Award, to the American Book Award, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Native Writers Circle of the Americas, membership in both the National Women's Hall of Fame and the Native American Hall of Fame, to honorary degrees from, well, all over. Credentials, that's one thing. The work, that's another. And maybe that's the real thing. Hers is a work as distinct as a fingerprint or sound of a voice. It is as shared, as collective, as communal, as natural, as water and lava and air. You'll see. Once, as I walked up the aisle at a writers' convention to read my own little poems, I looked around at the scary, stony faces. One of the faces broke into a big grin, and Joy said, "David, there you are," and raised up her hand for a high five as I walked by. I'll never forget that. Joy, here you are. Would you please come out here?
Mado, thank you for that wonderful introduction. And you have a cultural treasure here in your community with David Baker. He's one of the best. And yes, I've been here. I remember the campus and walking around here, even though I can't believe it's been that long ago. You will find out, one day you will find out how quickly time moves. Although I don't think it moves like in a steady, it's in a steady momentum. As you know, it slows down with grief and speeds up when you don't want it to. I'm going to read this one and start. It's kind of a poem to call things to order. It's called "For Calling the Spirit Back from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet." I'm going to start with the flute. I like to start with the flute anyway to make a song that honors the original peoples and the caretakers of these lands. You know, poetry is part of the caretaking. I often wonder what use human beings are to this planet. And I haven't figured it out yet, but I know, I know from my plants that they like to be sung to. The stones and the earth likes to be acknowledged and sung to. So this is in honor of this beautiful place and that has fed you and taken care of you, and your ancestors and will take care of your descendants if we continue to take care of the earth. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door, then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth gathering essences of plants to clean. Give back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars' ears and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream, planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasin feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, animals, people, birds that accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way, though there may be high-rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by thieves of time. Do not hold regrets. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar, sage, or other healing plant. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep a while after it is bathed and given clean clothes. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no place else to go. Make a giveaway. And remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark. So I'm going to read from different books and pieces and so on. Next, I'm going to read a few pieces from Poet Warrior, which is kind of a poetic memoir. My editor said that, who is also David's editor, said I reinvented memoir. I didn't start out to reinvent memoir. I just wrote it how I thought it should be. But I've been thinking about the preciousness of all of us in our communities, in our place. I guess traveling, I get to look through at go through a lot of little towns, big towns, look at windows. I always wonder about people and who they are and the stories that are taking place. And now I can't read the page number here, which is not good because I can't stand here and look through it. Yeah, here it is. So I wanted to start here because I think about, we're all human beings, but we can lose that. We can lose that. And I was thinking today about all these people. That's a lot of people killed all at once in an earthquake in Turkey and Syria. I was thinking about all those people and the grandparents and the children And all those, they get lost in large numbers and large sweeps of history. I've been thinking about the people in Congo and Ukraine and the people here in the little towns in Ohio and Pine Ridge and Muscogee, Oklahoma. And this is a little story about one moment where I watched a little family when I was in Calcutta for the Calcutta Book Fair, the largest book fair in the world that was canceled one year because two people on the board got into a fight. So there were all these poets in Calcutta. So they took us around. They started just taking us around to different communities, and we were doing poetry everywhere. That's how I learned how to improvise on the spot. They heard me play saxophone the first event, so every event I was told, get up and play a song about such and such, and I learned to do it. So when we are children, our parents are gods. They preside over our kingdom, which might be located in a house, an apartment, or even a single room or a car. Wherever it is, they root together. They have control, even if they are out of control. There are many kingdoms on a suburban street, in a city, in an apartment building, or along a country road. When I travel through a city, a town, countryside, or someplace else here or in another part of the world and pass by rows and rows of abodes, I think about all those small kingdoms, each hidden behind a doorway, behind each lighted and dark window. I think of all the stories we make and are making, each grandparent, parent, and child, and how each is rooted to earth and time. I will never forget coming up to a stoplight in Calcutta, India. And there, on the traffic island, in the middle of the street, a family had made a home of materials they had scavenged from the dump. During the momentary stop, I had a brief window to a life, a family. Pans hung neatly on the wall. Mother's hair was pulled up and tied as she cooked the scant offering for dinner. Father held his baby daughter on his knee, and there she was, precious in her yellow dress, wrapped in her father's loving arms. The light changed, then we were gone. I still think about this family, pray for them. I wonder how old the girl is now, if the family is okay, if they are still there on that traffic island. I wonder of what use is poetry and writing, and how my words can matter if they cannot help the family. So I'm going to keep reading this moment here, because there's some things I don't like to write about. I don't like discord. I'm a hardcore romantic, which it fits in some periods, and other periods people aren't interested. That's just how it is. It goes up and down in the country and so on. But I want to read this because this tells you, I was thinking about how you come upon things. As a writer, whether it's poetry, whether it's memoir or music, what gets exciting are those surprises, things that you cannot imagine, and there they are coming out of your mouth or your words or your music, and I always say, whoa, thank you. I had no idea. Thank you for finding your way through me. Because essentially I feel like I'm, in a sense, a kind of messenger of sorts, and I have to just be open and listen. I didn't like reading, I won't read all of this, but I don't like writing about difficult things, and yet, here we are on Earth, and and we're here, we're here making stories. I call this place a story field. We're here in this story field, and none of us will listen to a story in which there's not conflict. You wouldn't have a story then. But this little piece is going to land on an amazing, for me, it was like a stunning insight that wasn't mine, but it was given to me after I wrote this. After my stepfather's funeral, and this was, I don't know, see if I said anything in here. I had to be pulled back by a friend when they said, does anybody here have anything to say? And I was pulled back by family, so I couldn't say anything. After my stepfather's funeral, I sat out in my mother's yard with my stepsister, his daughter, who was near the same age as my mother. She had been like a mother to me as I navigated the difficult years in his house. He was her monster even as he was her father, so she knew the story and had relived it with me. She survived her growing up with him also by fleeing. We sat together in her car while everyone else gathered and ate in the house. The mood in the trailer home was rather celebratory. She confided to me that her grandfather, my stepfather's father, used to drink heavily and shoot up the house every weekend. The neighbors would see my stepfather when he was young on the roof every Sunday morning, a little boy hitching up his pants, patching up bullet holes, not much older than my toddler sister, whom he swung deftly by her leg to beat her. His mother spoiled him by doing everything for him, from cutting up his meat, even when he was a grown man, to giving him everything he asked for, even if it caused her great sacrifice. We agreed that such wildly divergent parenting could give birth to such a man as we tried to understand his life, how he used his light. And then I skip a little. I did not ask for this stepfather. He was not my choice. It was my mother's decision to bring him into our lives. I do not want his story here with mine even now. Yet he is probably one of my greatest teachers. Because of him, I learned to find myself in the spiritual world. To escape him, I grew an immense house of imagination. I decorated it. I planted a garden that would grow every year. I could find myself there living without fear. I even took flying lessons there. In that house, I met and spoke with my ancestors who had gone on, but who come back when we need their assistance. I found the ability to construct dreams with many kinds of materials. I saw the future. I saw the past. I battled monsters, then sat with them at the table to hear their stories. Everyone has a story. Even the monster has a story. I had no idea I was going to land there. And that's exciting. I mean, that's what I love about writing. And I think I'm going to go to this poem because of it, because every poem teaches you something about writing, or some of them do. And this one, I was surprised at the end. This is the poem that started the collection An American Sunrise, which that book started when I took a job at University of Tennessee, Knoxville. For one, the day I went for interviews, I did 8 interviews with different communities in the university, and I had a blast at every one. So I knew it was a good fit. And it was also in our homelands, in the homeland area, that part of Tennessee down, the Tennessee River was a roadway like I-70. So it was all, I have stories of my great-great-great-grandparents before removal, and my husband too, he's also Muscogee Creek, and same ceremonial ground. And we had family stories, and we actually went down to Columbus one time to visit a writer friend there, and we're taken around by a historian. He said, that house over there, it was still there, belonged to Patty Carr. And I said, yeah, that was my great-great-great-uncle. He had the largest horse racing establishment on the eastern seaboard. It had lots of houses. But you don't hear that when you think of Trail of Tears, the images, it's traumatic. Most people think it's just Cherokee. There were many, many tribal nations moved west. And they tend to think of us as cultureless or having nothing. But we had horse racing establishments, and we liked horse racing long before we always liked racing and games of chance. And they wanted all of those things, our pianos, all of that. We left all of that behind as we were marched west at gunpoint. So there we were, going and looking, and at the Chattahoochee River there too. We have stories there. That's where our story roots go, back there. And so the contradiction, I always write out of contradiction. I think everyone does these contradictions. Here we were, we'd been at Tennessee for 3 years, going around collecting checking out the story routes and wonderful work at the University of Tennessee. And my students helped me, I'll talk about this next, helped me with this anthology. And I remember thinking, our families, because we have those stories of how hard they fought against the removal of our people by Andrew Jackson, who illegally moved us. He went against the act of Congress and removed us anyway. Does that sound familiar? And moved us, and here I am, we're back in the homelands, and now we're excited to go back home to Oklahoma, which had been Indian territory, and what do you do with that? And that's how the book An American Sunrise started. But I remember looking out into the trees thinking, how in the world do you begin speaking of this history? And that's how this poem started. And the ending, I had no idea. I learned something. I learned something about what happened at the end of this poem. How to write a poem in a time of war. You can't begin just anywhere. It's a wreck. Shrapnel in the eye of a house, a row of houses. There's a rat scrambling from light with fleshy trash in its mouth. A baby strapped to its mother's back, cut loose. Soldiers crawl the city, the river, the town, the village, the bedroom, our kitchen. They eat everything or burn it. They kill what they cannot take. They rape what they cannot kill. They take. Rumors fall like rain, like bombs, like mother and father tears swallowed for restless peace. Like sunset slanting toward a moonless midnight, like a train blown free of its destination, like a seed fallen where there is no chance of trees or any place for birds to live. No, start here. Dear, peer from the edge of the woods. We used to see woodpeckers the size of the sun and were greeted by chickadees with their good morning songs. We'd started to cook outside, slippery with dew and laughter. Ah, these smoky sunrises. We tried to pretend war wasn't going to happen. They began building their houses all around us and demanding more. No, not here. You can't begin here. This is memory shredded because it is impossible to hold with words, even poetry. These memories were left here by the trees. The torn pocket of your daughter's hand-sewn dress, the sash, the lace, the baby's delicately beaded moccasin still connected to her foot. A young man's note of promise to his beloved. No, this is not the best place to begin. Everyone was asleep despite the distant bombs. Terror had become the familiar stranger. Our beloved twin girls curled up in their nightgowns next to their father and me. If we begin here, none of us will make it to the end of the poem. Someone has to make it out alive, sang a grandfather to his grandson, his granddaughter, as he blew his most powerful song into the hearts of the children. Chihoto chazari china oh lakari momais komet awachken ope yakatlis holwin. There, it would be hidden from the soldiers, who would take them miles, rivers, mountains from the naval court place of the origin story. He knew one day, far day, the grandchildren would return, generations later, over slick highways constructed over old trails, through walls of laws meant to hamper or destroy, over stones bearing libraries of the winds. He sang us back to our home place from which we were stolen, in these smoky green hills. Yes, begin here. So in the poem, one war began to weave into another. You know, what was going on in Syria, all of them started weaving in because they were all related. Like every drop of water is related to the ocean, to all of it. And so are the wars. I'm going to read, because of the territory I'm in, that we're in right now, is a poem by Laura Daw. I'm going to read a couple of poems out of, I was asked to speak a little of When the Light of the World Was Subdued. Our songs came through a Norton Anthology of Native Nations Poetry. And yes, I involve my graduate students in this endeavor. I asked, well, can I teach a class on how to make a Norton anthology? It was actually on Native Lit, but that's what we did. A lot of reading, and so their names are in here. They got to take part. And what I did was I divided it into, decided to do this in terms of areas of the country by land area. And that's how it's put together. So it's real interesting when you go through and read the poems in that way. You start to see how colonization worked in such each area and when it took place. You can see that in the poetry. And then you also see what mountains and the constructions, they all have to do with our poetry and how we write poetry. And and I also, there were several, because we can put together this. I was executive editor, and Leanne House and Jennifer Lees Forrester were both big editors next to me. And let's see. Yeah, so we also had groups of editors. So the book is divided into, like it starts out with East and Midwest, Northeast, Midwest. And we started there because the three of us are Southeast, and in our tradition, you start with East, and then you go counterclockwise. And so we thought, we'll be nice, we won't go Southeast first. We will go next. We'll go from East up to Northeast and Midwest. So each section, and I forget, I think there's 5 sections: East, Northeast, Midwest, Plains and Mountains, Pacific is a huge territories. There's no way we could cover everything. Pacific Northwest, Alaska and Pacific Islands, Southwest and West, and then Southeast. Each had their own group of editors, and what was so much fun is, this was Skype, this is BZ before Zoom. We would have the editors, all major, native poets, come to the classroom on Zoom, and we would talk through, and everybody was a part of it. I really enjoyed that process. And so I wanted to read, there's something else I was going to say, it'll come to me. This poem by Laura Daw, Eastern Shawnee. Daw is, I think she's married to a Pueblo, that's the last name. And Eastern Shawnee is a lifetime resident of the Pacific Northwest, where she teaches and writes. She studied creative writing at the University of Washington and at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. In 2015, she was named both a Hugo House Fellow and a Jack Straw Fellow, and has written, I think she got a 3rd book out from these two, Instruments of True Measure and Tributaries, which won an American Book Award. And a lot of the Shawnees here were removed to Oklahoma, and there's a close connection too with Shawnees and the Muscogee people. Tecumseh came down to speak with our people, with my great-grandfather, I'm 6 generations from him, about the Great Alliance, and that's how that helped fuel our resistance to Andrew Jackson at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend, and my grandfather was part of that. So her poem here, because there's the Shawnee Nation of Oklahoma, is Measuring the Distance to Oklahoma. So this is Laura Daw's poem. Shell shaking in the state of the coin toss and sorrowful walk, weaving through the powwow grounds, grass stomped low and buzzing with flies. Your son walks 2 quick steps ahead of me to point out a tiny bow and arrow at a vendor's booth. Rats scuttle in the grain silo. The gentle clamor of the casino washes through the parking lot. A table is piled with 6 corn cakes, each one embossed with the maker's thumbprint. Your grandfather recounts catching water moccasins as a boy and spitting wads of tobacco down their throats just to watch them squirm. You sink onto a dusty quilt, gently pull the empty Coke can from your boy's sleeping fist, shake your head impatiently when your daughter whines for you to untie an intricately beaded belt from her regalia. Child's arrow capped with a pencil eraser twirling in your fingers. Ottawa County moon, a scene from a distance, pale vodka swirling in an open mouth, driving home on the frontage road, green and riveted as a turtle's back, highway sketched into place by the broken black lines of oil rigs at midnight. There's a lot of stories about oil in Oklahoma, including, Elise Passion. That Killers of the Flower Moon, the title came from a poem by Elise Passion. She finally got credited for it. And I think they're trying to get the credit in the film right now. But I wanted to read this one too from here because this poem was written in the late 1800s, it's 1913, at Carlisle Indian School, which is just down the road, I-70, Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I guess it's not just down the road, but depends on how you're looking at the map. And it's anonymous, and I can just see, I've taught and been around kids like this who, you write poems and they don't want to read it, or don't put my name on it, don't say who it is. But a little background, it's called Anonymous Carlisle Student, Anonymous Poet from Room B. And the military-style Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania was founded by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Henry Pratt in 1879 as a tool of assimilation. He's known for his infamous motto, "Kill the Indian and save the man." The school recruited more than 10,000 Indian children from 141 tribes. So here's his poem. He was writing poetry. I love this. It's called My Industrial Work. It's very military, and you'll hear that. At 2:30 in the afternoon, you can find me in the 28 room, about 3 or 4 covers deep. You turn them back and you'll find me asleep. And there I lie and patiently wait for the final exams we have in room 8. When the whistle blows at 5:30, once more I am up and still alive. Then I run down and wash my face, then comb my hair, and I'm ready for grace. In 15 minutes, there's a bugle call. The troops fall in and the roll is called. Then out in front, the troops all stand, saluting the flag with our hats in our hand. While standing in the wind, our hair gets wavy, but just the same, we right face and march to gravy. Now, this may sound like going a-fishing, but this is my only industrial position. So that was from Carlisle. Let's see. I'm going to read a few more poems. I'm going to read An American Sunrise. I would play it for you if I had my band here. You can find it on all the digital platforms. There's 2 versions. The better one is under my album, I Pray for My Enemies. And this came out of a form that invented by Terrence Hayes based on Gwendolyn Brooks' poems. And if you know her poem, We Real Cool, you'll hear one of the ends of one of the lines. What you do is take a line in the poem, and the end of each line is a word in order from that poem. It's An American Sunrise. We were running out of breath as we ran to meet ourselves. We were surfacing the edge of our ancestors' fights and ready to strike. It was difficult to lose days in the Indian bar if you were straight. Easy if you played pool and drank to remember to forget. We made plans to be professional, and some of us could sing. When we drove to the edge of the mountains with a drum, we made sense of our beautiful, crazed lives under the starry stars. Sin was invented by the Christians, as was the devil, we sang. We were the heathens, but needed to be saved from them. Thin chance. We knew we were all related in this story. A little gin will clarify the dark and make us all feel like dancing. We had something to do with the origins of blues and jazz. I argued with the music as I filled the jukebox with dimes in June. 40 years later, and we still want justice. We are still America. We. And thank you. I'm going to read a new poem just because it's new. Well, I don't always read. Sometimes it's a mistake to read a new poem. I wish I could show you the image, but I was asked to write a poem for a Picasso painting for an exhibit that's going to go up in Madrid. I haven't heard back from them. I don't know. They may not like the poem. But it's one of his later paintings, kind of semi-cubist. You can see he's pulling off, all kinds of influences from so-called primitive works. So it's basically seated nude, and when you look it up, there's like hundreds of them by Picasso. And she's sitting there with her legs open, but you wouldn't really, you can't, it's the bottom part of her is painted thickly and broad stroked, and then there's her head above it, kind of angular, like she's thinking. And this is what she's thinking. And like I said, they might not like this over there, I don't know. But I had a lot, that's my motto these days, is I've decided, because I'm going to be traveling every week through June, is I might as well have fun. I was in the middle of my own creation, a life. I was making a home, a city. The market was closing. It was near the end of the month, and I had to pay the bills. The generations are roaring within me, infinitely small at first. Their songs need pine trees, a stream with ferned stones, a sunrise without rooftops. I'll take my clothes off for you, old man, for your young man fantasy. I indulge you. What is love? It isn't sex. You only play at the doorway. I have to chop onions, cry, send my ears into the street to find the news. Go ahead and remake me with your monster art. Your art is your wife, not me with my ink and paper. I won't stay long. I am young and getting older. You are old and growing younger. I had fun with that. And I'll close with this one. I mean, there's so much to... Anymore, I pick out about twice as much that I have time to read. But this is a newer poem called Without. And this I wrote, I lost a beloved brother-in-law. He was my husband's favorite person to fight with. And he sure misses him, I can tell. We all miss him. And I get sad when I think about it. And he had just married his childhood sweetheart from Chilocco Indian School. And they were so in love. And, it was like finally they had, they were happy. And this COVID thing happened, and she went and got vaccinated. He got angry. He was not happy. He thought his church was telling him not to get vaccinated. And she did anyway. And he was, I think, the 9th person in his church to get COVID and die. And so they asked me to write a poem for the service. And this is not the poem I included, because you write a poem for the audience. I wrote a different poem. But this was thinking about it. And it also taught me to go through my old notebooks, because I found half of this poem in there, and I thought, poem, what are you doing in there? It's like, okay, but I found part of it, and so I made it into here. And again, the end is a surprise. I kept trying to change. I'll tell you when I get there. Without. And I want to say thank you. It's not over yet, but I still want to say Mado is thank you in Muscogee for inviting me back the 3rd time. And I'm still alive. And it's always, every time I've come here, I've had a good experience here. And Thank you. And I like the way that David was giving gratitude for, there's somebody that takes care of the lights. There's a stage, they got a great stage manager here. There's the sound. You could tell they did a really good job. If they don't like you, they will make you sound horrible. And for you guys coming out, for the people who cook things, there's a lot that goes into this kind of event things you don't even know about. People picking you up and taking you around and all of that. So thank you for that, and the sponsors and everyone. This is called Without. The world will keep trudging through time without us when we lift from the story contest to fly home. We will be as falling stars to those watching from the edge of grief and heartbreak. Maybe then we will see the design of the two-minded creature and know why half the world fights righteously for greedy masters, and the other half is nailing it all back together through the smoke of cooking fires, lovers' trysts, and endless human industry. Maybe then, beloved rascal, we will find each other again in the timeless weave of breathing. We will sit under the trees in the shadow of earth's sorrows, watch hyenas drink rain, and laugh. Thank you. Thank you. So I'll end with a little play, and hyenas, I kept fighting. I can't put hyenas in there. They don't live in Oklahoma, but then I think I've traveled all over the world, and in my dreams I travel a lot of places, so of course there's hyenas. Thank you. This is a performance piece here called Changing the Set, In Between. Thank you.
Well, hello. I'm going to ask Joy the first question. But first, I want to thank you for that beautiful reading and for the beautiful flute playing, and thank you for your willingness to answer a few questions now. So thanks. So first I wanted to ask you a question about being Poet Laureate. You were Poet Laureate of the United States for 3 terms, from 2019 to 2022, which were 3 very difficult years. What were some of the things you did as Poet Laureate, and what did you think was most important for you to do as Poet Laureate?
Oh, that was intense. You don't expect to get that call, and I was tricked by Rob Casper. He tricked me because he also runs the National Book Festival, and he says, I have a quick question for you, and I had a book coming out. And next thing I know, we set up a time for me to call back, and then they asked if I would be U.S. Poet Laureate. And I didn't say yes right away. I stopped for a moment, and I thought, oh my God, I'm already so busy. How am I going to fit this in? That's what went through my mind. But it was like lightning. I was kind of I was in shock for a while with it. But the first thing the first thing they ask you is, what is your project? The way it's set up is, there's 1 year if you just want to hang out and enjoy the honor. 2 years if you have a project. And there's only been 2 of us that have done 3 years, and the only reason I got 3 years is not because I was really good at it, but because of the pandemic. And I couldn't get out and about, and even still, their 3rd year, there was still the pandemic going on. But the project was a big one. Of course, I had all kinds of ideas, but I decided to, there's a project, Living Nations, Living Words, and this book came out of that. It's part of the project, but it's essentially a digital map, which came in real handy when it turned out we were in a pandemic, because it was online, but it was to show a map. I've always been interested in geography and maps, and when I went for orientation, I said, I want to see the library. I always wondered which door, how do you go around? So I visited a lot of the departments. I had a really good time, and they were wonderful and generous. And I went to geography and maps, and so I picked out a map that showed no political boundaries. There was no border between the US and Canada or Mexico. There were no names, just earth and water. And I picked that map to to locate Native poets. One, to show, essentially, we're still here. We're still here. A lot of people still don't believe, I've talked to a lot of people who were taught that we were all gone. And to show voices, to say that here's poets, poetry is alive. I asked, 47 came through, we asked for 50, and they were located, and they talked. I asked them to talk about, I didn't pick their poem, they picked their own poem, and then they spoke. So now there's a collection of poets, Native poets, speaking about, reading poetry and speaking place in the collections at the Library of Congress. But that was important, but actually the original idea, there's a thing with capacity. These people work really hard at the Library of Congress. They don't have a lot of money, and they were doing this project on the side as part of it. So they could barely handle that many poets, but I wanted to put all the Native poets from forever, and then I wanted to include all the poets because we know each other. Look, we know each other here, we know each other's poetry, and becomes important. And so I wanted to have that as a kind of a layer of, the poets. You could even do layers, and it gets complicated, and I don't know if there's software to do that, where you have contemporary, older, and then all the American poets. So I wound up as 47. But it became important in a lot of ways to show that, it's alive and we're here.
And some of that you can find online, right?
Yes, it's at Library of Congress, on the Library of Congress site. And there's talk, we're trying to take there's one organization that was kind of interested, but I would like to do one of global Indigenous poets. So they're, from all over the world.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you a question. This is a fake question, first of all. When my buddies get together and their poets are around, the first thing we say isn't really, let's talk about the theme of this and that.
Right.
And it's like, what are you reading now?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and that's what we talk about. But I want to ask you a question about the flute and how important it has been for you to play lots of music, the alto sax and the flute, and how important it has been for you to make visual art, to do painting. And I'm wondering then, as I think about your poems, are there things in the playing of the flute or the sax that you specifically bring over to the poems? Or are there things in the poems that teach you how to play the flute?
It's all about rhythm, I think, and phrasing. And I've always been rhythm oriented. You know, I was in dance classes when I was 5 because I like dancing. That comes from my mother. And you heard that story.
Yeah.
And my father too. They were dancers, and they loved. I mean, they're not dancers. They love to dance, but everything is rhythm. I mean, if you know, every cell of everything is moving. This earth, you know, it's all rhythm. So that goes back and forth. And then the phrasing, even tonalities. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily in some language, tonalities can matter a great deal. Like I studied Navajo language when I was younger, and tonalities could make a huge difference. I think Chinese is like that too. Different, it's not Chinese, it's Mandarin well, anyway. But it's also phrasing, like how to write a poem in a time of war. When I read that early part, to me, I'm always imagining it's how, like, when I improvise. I love improvising. The songs I played, I make up and for the place or whatever. What I liked when I was making up the second one is I was getting to the resolve and not resolving, and I thought, I can play with this and make it into something larger later. So I was finding it.
Yeah.
But that's what I carry over. It goes back and forth because when I've written poems from the beginning, I've always been aware of phrasing.
Yeah. Well, as you answered that question, even you were playing the flute. And when you were reading this evening, there were moments when you just kind of naturally turned to song and began to sing. And then there was a time to play. And there was almost no difference or no division between one instrument and another, or one manner of making a story and another.
I think that comes from the older traditions.
Yeah.
I remember, and I don't always know what I'm doing. I mean, on some level, I mean, I think we are in a story field, and there's an ancestral field, and these forms and shapes come down. And sometimes you don't even know you're doing that, but there it is. It's like, you know, somebody finding a kid on New York City and saying, well, he's playing rhythms, he's out there playing drums, he's made out of stuff that come from a people that he didn't even know. Yeah. And I think we do that. I remember years ago being in, I think, the Seattle, Washington State, Oregon, or it could have been Oregon area, and I read with Scott Momaday and maybe some other people. And I noticed this young man from one of the Plateau Basin tribal nations. And I noticed him because I thought immediately he was raised by the old people. You could kind of see that in his manner. So he waits and waits. People are up talking, mostly to Scott, but people are talking. And we're waiting there and visiting. And then he comes up after everyone is gone, and he says, thank you for what you're doing. It reminded me of my grandparents. Yeah. Because they would sing, talk, tell stories, play music, and it kind of would weave itself in like that. Yeah.
So you talk in your memoirs and elsewhere about the connection between poetry and healing.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are some of the ways that your poetry might be healing for others? And what are some of the ways that healing others might be healing for you?
Well, that's a big question.
I know.
I'm gonna drink my water.
Want to drink water? Yeah.
Here, I have a special cup here. Well, it all is. I mean, I think that essentially we're all here, the stories are. I mean, whatever stories. I mean, they're all involved in our, what is healing, but it's kind of coming to a harmony, but also coming to some kind of understanding. You know, people heal when they have stories that make no sense and it's chaotic and they don't know what to do with it or they run from it, hence addiction. And healing comes when, that's why AA has been so successful, because it's storytelling circles, essentially. You know, to tell your story, to tell the story. Sometimes the story's horrible. The story of history or the story of family or the story of people, we do horrible things to each other. And then sometimes we carry around the shame or the humiliation of it or even our, you know, of being victimized or being the victimizer. And so it's storytelling, it's, you know, writing poetry about it, or somehow being able to express what can't be expressed in some way. That's why I always say I came to poetry is to speak what's unspeakable. Mm-hmm. What needs to be, you know, what is, you know, even what we can't understand. Sometimes it takes years to be able to understand something.
I have this really lucky chance this semester to teach a course I've never taught before called 14 Poems. Just the whole semester.
Cool.
And we were spending this week with Joy Harjo poem. And my class of 18 people, 17 people yesterday read, she had some horses.
Oh, wow.
In pieces. Somebody would read a line, somebody would read a few more lines and a few more lines. It was really a gorgeous thing. I talked to them about the poem and about your work, and near the end of the period, I said, look, you'll see her tomorrow night, and we're going to have this conversation on stage. And I asked a question. I didn't think they'd say anything. I said, but is there anything you would like me to ask her? And they were all like this. So I have a couple of questions for my students. Is that okay? Two different people said, you've written a lot of different kinds of things, and I tried to name some of those in the introduction tonight. How do you decide what you're going to do, or what genre, or what form a thing is going to be, and what's your favorite?
You know, it just depends. First, I just wrote poetry.
Yeah.
And then I think once I had a granddaughter, my lines started getting longer, and I started writing more prosaic poems. And then I started writing stories. I think, the way I think is like there's milk released in the mother when the baby's born, and something is released in the grandparents, you know, when that happens. So then I started writing more stories with Crazy Brave and then Poet Warrior, and I just contracted for a third and final memoir called Cloud Runner. And again, with Poet Warrior and then with Cloud Runner, just thinking of you guys, you know, the future.
Yeah. Wow.
But it just depends. Like it took me 10 years. I mean, I've done a lot of drafts, versions. I totally changed it out, but I've developed the characters as a musical play. I don't call it a musical because it's not a Western style musical that will show that Muscogee people are part of the origin story of blues and jazz. But it's a story of a young group of people, your generation, in a band, and etc. But that, I could do that. I thought about when I was getting frustrated with it and thinking, well, I should just write it as a book. I know how to do that. Because I've done a one-woman show. I'm getting ready to tape it for Bard at the Gate, that Paula Vogel series that she's doing. But it needed that form. It's going to need that form. I think it might wind up being a film, but it's a stage. It was written for stage.
Let me follow up on that, because somebody else asked me a different question. People are hungry for, you know, your new work. What can they look forward to in the near future? You're working, or you've just finished this play. What else is coming out? I think you said you have a new children's book coming out?
A children's book coming out in the 23rd of March.
Also, you're all done. That's done.
That is done. It's the poem Remember. I didn't do the artwork. Michaela Goad, who won a Caldecott Medal for her last illustrations for the Water Protector. She's wonderful. Her artwork is great. What next? I just had Catching the Light come out, and then the Weaving Sundown just came out. I'm trying to stay away from anthologies. Although I keep thinking there's a children's one we need to put out, but I just want to, I'm working on music. I want to start painting. I had set up to start painting, and then the Poet Laureateship hit. So, but yeah, I want to work on that book, and I'm also going to work on a kind of letters to kind of a coming age thing for people coming of age.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
So I'm going to follow up a little bit on talking about your two memoirs that you've already written. Is there a story from your youth that helps you understand your choice to be a poet?
Man, well, I love poetry. I mean, I liked reading. I remember I was 8 years old, and my mother asked me what I wanted, and I said I wanted books. And she knew I liked poetry. She liked poetry. She's the one that passed that on to me. And she bought me that Louis Untermeyer's The Golden Treasury of Poetry. I thought my sister had it, but she did. I kept the original around. I think I gave it to my daughter. I don't know where it is. But I bought another version, a newer version, same thing, the same layout. And I loved that book. I liked spending a lot of time alone. Maybe that was part of it too. Is that I had good hiding places. And our mother, she loved us. She had an 8th grade education, and she got a little, I think, insecure around seeing us with books. And my sister and I laugh about it now because I wound up at the Library of Congress. It's like, put that book down and get to work. What else can you do?
Yeah.
I know she doesn't like me saying that, but because she, appreciates it. But she didn't always know what I was up to, which is good. But I was very inventive. But yeah, I like to spend a lot of time alone and listen. I would say things, I would sing, and I like the sound of vibrating voice and the sounds of words. I remember one summer I spent going through the dictionary, learning new words and sounding, just because.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that, yeah, that probably says something.
Well, it says this thing. Every serious, really great writer I know is a serious, great reader, even more than a writer. Everybody who is a terrific writer reads and reads and reads and reads. So who among your peers, whose work is central to you? Whose work do you live for? Have you taken into your blood? And who among the new writers, among the young generation, are you looking toward to see what they do?
I think last night we were talking a little bit about it, and when I went to the undergrad at University of New Mexico and then later Iowa. But in New Mexico, later, I was friends with, because Leslie moved back, and I was living there, and May Bursenbrugge, whose work, I've always loved May's work. And the three of us were like, Leslie, we looked different, I thought, but people would mistake us for each other. I guess because, and I love Leslie's work, Leslie Marmon Silko. I knew her first through her poetry, actually.
Right.
And then her novel, Ceremony. And then Almanac of the Dead, and then Garden of the, what was it called? Was it Garden of the Dunes?
Yeah.
Garden of the Dunes. I loved her letters with James Wright, who is one of my favorite poets. And she's had a book she's been working on for years called The Blue Sevens. I don't know where that is. She's done a lot of painting in between. And then May is just, what I like about May, now she's, I don't know what you would call, she's more experimental, but in some of the experimental poets, I can understand what they're doing, like reading math equations, but I'm not engaged. And what May does is takes me right in, and I'm in that world of architectural, a beautiful architectural aesthetic place. And I love May's work too.
So what do you think about young poets, or poets just starting now? What do you think, if there's any difference, is the work to be done? What can you imagine for them to work for?
Really interesting looking at the kind of this next group of native poets who were like Layli Long Soldier, D.G. Okpik, Nanook Okpik, and Sherwin Bitsui, and then Natalie Diaz. I mean, very strong, and there's other very strong poets that came out of actually Arthur Z's teaching, I think, out of the Institute of American Indian Arts. And they very much followed, I could see his aesthetic, in a way, very much passed on to him. And then I think even in my generation, James Welch, I think, is one of the best with his writing the Earth Boy 40 was his only book of poetry. He went on to write novels, but he still shines. And I think, well, what is next? Because I think of how identity is still very strong, but with I was thinking of Tommy Orange's novel, what is the name of that?
There.
There. It becomes, there's another level of shift when it comes to place. I mean, you think about place, and that is very urban, and yet it is very much his people. And so I think about that, and where that's going to go, and who the teachers are. I mean, lately, it was so cool to go out with her we did a gig together at University of Minnesota, and to watch her teach and it was really exciting, and I was thinking about the who follows.
I think about it all the time. And what's that work going to look like?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have 5 minutes left.
Oh,
Really?
So
Yeah, okay.
I knew that it would happen quickly. So I'm going to ask you a question for a friend. Well, some of it's from me, but so part of the beauty and power of your poetry, and you talked about speaking the unspeakable, and part of that is how you teach and create a spiritual relationship to the land and the material world in your poetry. How you make it happen for the reader in so many ways. How should non-native readers who embrace those spiritual beliefs make sure to do it in a way that's respectful to native people and cultures?
Well, I think they just do it from their own point of view. You don't have to borrow. I mean, we're all earth. We're all part of this construction, or this field, this story field. And you just, as someone once told me, and it sounded simplistic years ago, and then I came to understand it was the most profound wisdom, was to be yourself. You can be yourself and write fantasy. You can be yourself, but that's what I would say. Everything is, people get into using these terms like sacred, or it becomes almost, especially with native people, it becomes trite. And yet this whole place is, if you look at it that way. And of course the profane is right, is its twin. And what can happen is people think that they're not, or I remember somebody coming up to me at a party years ago and saying, I'm sorry, I don't have a soul, because she thought she didn't have a culture or I said, that just broke my heart, because she didn't feel like she had a people, or she wasn't native. And I said, everybody has a soul, everybody has stories. And we're all part of this. We have a relationship to this place. Everybody does. It's here.
I have to say, it's hard to think of a thing to say after that.
Yeah.
That seems like a beautiful way to end our evening. Is that all right with you?
Yes, I think.
Thank you all for
Okay.
coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy.